In the heart of the African savanna, Amara's life was a quiet storm of love, betrayal, and resilience. Trapped in a marriage weighed down by her husband's silence and his domineering mother, Maisha, Amara endured years of emotional torment. But when Mawisha's cruelty escalated into a shocking act of violence, throwing scalding oil at her during a heated confrontation, Amara's world shattered. Scarred both physically and emotionally, she made the boldest decision of her life to leave. What followed was a journey of raw determination and transformation. With nothing but her strength and resolve, Amara found herself in a women's cooperative, surrounded by others who had survived their own battles, Piece by piece, she rebuilt her life, creating a workshop that became a haven for women like her, those who refused to let their pain define them. Amara's scars became her armor, her story a beacon of hope. Through courage and grit, she turned tragedy into triumph, inspiring a movement that transformed not only her village, but countless lives. Her tale is one of fire, freedom, and unyielding strength. Who is this woman who rose from the ashes? And what can her story teach us about the power of survival? The air in the village of Unguvu was thick with the smell of burning wood and the distant aroma of roasted maize. Evening was settling over the Kenyan savanna, casting long golden shadows across the thatched roof huts and fields of swaying grass. Amara crouched by the fire outside her modest mud brick home, her hands busy kneading dough for chapati. The rhythmic sound of her palms slapping the dough was soothing, a small comfort in an otherwise restless heart. Her gaze wandered to the horizon, where the sun dipped behind the escarpment, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red. This place had once been her sanctuary. She had imagined a life of partnership and love with Daniel, her husband of 4 years. But now, as the sun cast its last rays over their small plot of land, she felt a growing shadow pressing down on her spirit. The sound of a bicycle crunching over the dirt path jolted her from her thoughts. Daniel was returning from the fields, his shirt soaked with sweat and dust clinging to his legs. He dismounted near the house and offered her a weary smile, though his eyes betrayed the tension that had become a permanent fixture between them. "Did you hear?" he asked, his voice tinged with a forced cheerfulness. "Mama Maisha is coming to stay tonight. She sent word this morning." Amara froze, her hands pausing mid-knead. Her stomach churned at the mention of her mother-in-law. Maisha was a force of nature in the worst way, a woman whose presence filled every room with her dominance, leaving no space for anyone else. leaving no space for anyone else. Maisha's visits always brought a storm of criticism, manipulation, and veiled insults that left Amara questioning her place in the household. "She didn't ask," Amara said quietly, her voice tinged with frustration. "She just decided." Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, his discomfort evident. "You know how she is, Amara. She means well, but she just has her ways." Amara bit back a retort, knowing it would lead nowhere. Daniel's loyalty to his mother was as immovable as the mountains, a loyalty that had repeatedly left Amara feeling like a guest in her own home. She turned her focus back to the dough, trying to swallow the bitterness rising in her throat. By the time the sun had fully set and the first stars began to dot the sky, Maisha arrived. She did not walk as most villagers did, but was carried in the back of a boda, her presence as grand as the moonlit savanna. She wore a bright kanga wrapped tightly around her ample frame, her wrists jingling with gold bangles that caught the firelight. A straw hat sat jauntily on her head, as though she were arriving from a luxurious vacation instead of the neighboring village. Maisha stepped down from the motorcycle with exaggerated elegance and greeted Daniel with an embrace so performative it might have belonged to a stage play. Her sharp eyes immediately scanned the compound, and her lips curled into a disapproving pout, and her lips curled into a disapproving pout. This place is so modest, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. She turned her gaze to Amara, who stood by the fire, wiping her hands on her apron. Amara, my dear, I hope you've made something edible this time. Last time was, well, I'm still recovering from it. Amara forced a tight smile, her chest tightening with resentment. Dinner is ready, Mama Maisha. Please, have a seat. As Maisha settled onto a wooden bench, Amara carried the dishes to the small table inside their home. The glow of the kerosene lamp flickered, casting shadows on the mud walls. The interior was simple but clean, a labor of love Amara had poured her heart into. Maisha, of course, noticed none of it. They sat down together, the three of them forming a tense triangle around the table. Maisha dominated the conversation as always, recounting tales of her recent church fundraiser and gossip about her neighbors. She barely touched the food, instead poking at it with a disdainful expression. So, Amara, Maisha said suddenly, her tone feigning sweetness. How is the baby? Making coming along? Or should I say, the lack of it? The question landed like a slap. Amara's cheeks flushed, her hands tightening into fists beneath the table. It was no secret that she and Daniel had struggled to conceive, but Maisha's constant jabs turned their private pain into public humiliation. Mama, Daniel interjected weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. Let's not talk about that now. Maisha ignored him, leaning closer to Amara. You know, in my time, a barren woman would step aside so her husband could find someone capable of continuing the family line. It's only fair, don't you think? Amara's vision blurred with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She met Maisha's gaze, her voice calm but laced with steel. And in my time, Mama, we believe in respecting the boundaries of others. Perhaps you should try it sometime. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Maisha's eyes narrowed, her lips pursing into a thin line. Boundaries, she repeated mockingly. You speak of boundaries as though you understand what it means to be part of this family. Let me tell you, young woman, it is I who decide where the boundaries lie. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting between the two women. Amara glanced at him, hoping for support, but he remained silent, as always. Her heart sank. After the tense meal, Amara busied herself cleaning up, seeking solace in the repetitive motions of scrubbing plates and sweeping the dirt floor. Outside, crickets chirped in the cool night air, a stark contrast to the storm brewing within her home. Maisha sat by the fire, sipping tea and murmuring complaints about the food, the house, and even the weather. As the night deepened, Amara retreated to the small bedroom she shared with Daniel. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the clay walls. The weight of Maisha's words and Daniel's silence bore down on her like an oppressive heat. Daniel entered the room, avoiding her gaze. "She's just tired, Amara," he said softly. "She doesn't mean half the things she says." Amara turned to him, her voice breaking. "But she says them, Daniel. And you let her, every time." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want me to do? She's my mother." "And I'm your wife," Amara replied, her voice rising. Daniel said nothing, his silence cutting deeper than any words could. Amara turned away, pulling the thin blanket over herself as tears silently traced down her cheeks. Outside, the fire crackled, casting shadows that danced eerily against the walls of their home. Maisha's laughter rang out, cold and sharp, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, her presence loomed over them like a curse. The morning sun spilled over the savanna, illuminating the village in a golden glow. But for Amara, the day began with the same heaviness that had plagued her the night before. She woke to the sound of Maisha's commanding voice echoing from outside, issuing orders as though the household belonged to her. Daniel had already left for the fields, leaving Amara to navigate the storm alone. Amara stepped out of the house, her eyes narrowing against the sunlight. Maisha stood by the fire, supervising a pot of porridge as though her presence were essential for its success. A group of curious children had gathered nearby, whispering and giggling, their attention drawn to Maisha's grand demeanor. "Good morning, Mama," Amara said, forcing a polite tone. Maisha turned, her lips curling into a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Ah, Amara, you've decided to join us. I was beginning to wonder if you plan to sleep the entire day." Amara's jaw tightened, but she chose not to respond. She moved to the fire, silently taking over the task of stirring the pot. Maisha remained nearby, her sharp eyes following Amara's every move. "You know," Maisha began, her tone casual but laced with venom, "if you were more attentive, this house would run much smoother. I managed a household of 12 without so much as a wrinkle on my kanga." Amara swallowed her frustration. "I'm doing my best, Mama." "Your best?" Maisha scoffed, shaking her head. "Your best is barely passable. Look at this porridge, too thin. No wonder Daniel looks so tired these days. Are you even feeding him properly?" The remark stung, but Amara refused to let Maisha see the effect. She continued stirring, her knuckles white from gripping the spoon too tightly. As the day wore on, Maisha's presence became increasingly suffocating. She found fault in everything Amara did, from the way she folded laundry to the way she swept the floor. Her comments were relentless, each one cutting deeper than the last. Amara tried to maintain her composure, but her patience was wearing thin. By midday, Daniel returned from the fields, his shirt soaked with sweat. He paused at the edge of the compound, glancing between his mother and his wife. The tension was palpable, thickening the air like an oncoming storm. "Daniel!" Maisha called, her voice warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the tone she reserved for Amara. "Come, sit. I've prepared tea for you." Amara frowned, watching as Maisha poured tea into a chipped enamel cup and handed it to Daniel. It was a small gesture, but one that seemed designed to assert her dominance. Daniel accepted the cup with a grateful smile, oblivious to the silent battle unfolding between the two women. "How was the field?" Amara asked, hoping to draw Daniel into a neutral conversation. "It was fine," he replied, his tone distracted. He glanced at Maisha, who was already launching into a story about her latest visit to the church committee. Amara's question went unanswered, swallowed by Maisha's ceaseless chatter. As the afternoon dragged on, Maisha's demands grew bolder. She insisted on reorganizing the kitchen, claiming Amara's system was inefficient. She criticized the state of the garden, declaring it a disgrace to the family name. When Amara finally protested, suggesting that Maisha rest instead of taking over, Maisha's response was swift and biting. "Rest? Do you think I'm too old to contribute? Perhaps if you did your job properly, I wouldn't have to step in." Amara felt the sting of the words, but what hurt more was Daniel's silence. He stood nearby, sipping his tea and avoiding her gaze. Her frustration bubbled beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maisha announced that she intended to stay indefinitely. She spoke as though the decision was hers alone, her words carrying the weight of finality. "This house," she declared, gesturing around the small compound, "is too quiet. It needs the presence of family. I will stay and ensure everything runs smoothly." Amara's heart sank. The thought of Maisha's constant scrutiny, her unending stream of criticisms, was unbearable. She glanced at Daniel, hoping he would intervene, but he merely nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground. "Of course, Mama," he said softly. "You're always welcome here." Amara couldn't contain her anger any longer. "This isn't just your decision, Daniel. This is our home. Shouldn't we discuss this as a family?" Daniel's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise. Maisha, however, looked unfazed. She fixed Amara with a cold, steady gaze. "A family discussion?" she repeated, her tone mocking. "What is there to discuss? I am family, Amara. Or do you think you outrank me?" Amara opened her mouth to respond, but the words caught in her throat. She felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of Maisha's presence and Daniel's passivity. That night, Amara lay awake, her mind racing. She thought of the life she had envisioned when she married Daniel, a partnership built on mutual respect and love. Instead, she found herself locked in a constant battle for autonomy, her voice drowned out by the overpowering presence of Maisha. The next morning, Maisha's demands escalated. She instructed Daniel to clear a section of the garden for her personal use, dismissing Amara's protests with a wave of her hand. She criticized the food at breakfast, claiming it lacked flavor, and suggested Amara take lessons from the women in the neighboring village. By midday, Amara could no longer hold back her anger. As they sat under the shade of an acacia tree, Maisha began another tirade, this time about the state of the household finances. "Daniel works so hard," she said, shaking her head. "And yet, there's so little to show for it. Amara, are you even managing the money properly?" Amara's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. "I manage the household as best I can, Mama. Perhaps if you trusted me instead of constantly undermining me, things would improve. Maisha's eyes narrowed. Trust you? You've given me no reason to trust you. A wife's duty is to support her husband and his family. Instead, you've brought nothing but shame. The words struck Amara like a slap. Her chest tightened, her vision blurring with unshed tears. She turned to Daniel, desperate for support. Daniel, she said, her voice trembling. Will you just sit there and let her speak to me this way? Daniel hesitated, his eyes darting between Amara and Maisha. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His silence was deafening, a stark reminder of where his loyalties lay. Amara rose abruptly, the bench scraping against the dirt as she pushed it back. I will not sit here and be insulted in my own home. Maisha laughed, a cold, hollow sound that sent a chill down Amara's spine. Your home. Don't fool yourself, Amara. This is Daniel's home, and by extension mine. You are merely a guest. The finality of Maisha's words hung in the air, suffocating and inescapable. Amara stormed away, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and despair. As she retreated to the kitchen, the pot of stew bubbling on the fire mirrored the turmoil within her. She gripped the edge of the counter, struggling to steady herself. The walls seemed to close in, the small space feeling impossibly claustrophobic. Somewhere in the distance, Maisha's voice carried on, a relentless reminder of her dominance. Amara's chest heaved as she fought back tears. She knew the breaking point was near, a storm building on the horizon, ready to shatter the fragile peace of their home. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the compound as the tension inside Amara's home reached its peak. The small mud brick kitchen, usually a place of warmth and comfort, now felt like a battleground. Amara stirred the pot of stew on the fire, her movements sharp and mechanical, each stir fueled by the storm brewing inside her. From the main room, she could hear Maisha's voice cutting through the air like a blade. Daniel, this is why you should have listened to me from the start, Maisha declared, her tone triumphant. A proper wife, one from a respectable family, would have brought stability to your life, not this. The word this carried every ounce of disdain Maisha could muster, and it struck Amara with the force of a slap. Her hand froze on the wooden spoon, her knuckles white as she gripped it. She felt a heat rise within her, more intense than the fire beneath the stew. Maisha continued, unrelenting. And the garden, look at the state of it. How can anyone with pride allow such disarray? Amara doesn't even know the basics of running a household. She's an embarrassment. Amara clenched her teeth, the words echoing in her mind. For years, she had endured Maisha's scorn in silence, hoping that time or effort would earn her respect. But today, with Daniel sitting passively, as Maisha tore her apart, something inside her snapped. She wiped her hands on her apron and marched into the main room, her heart pounding. Enough, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. Maisha turned slowly, raising an eyebrow. Excuse me? I said enough, Amara repeated, meeting her gaze. You come into my home, insult me, undermine everything I do, and expect me to stay silent. I won't do it anymore. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands wrapped around a chipped enamel cup. Amara, please. No, Daniel, she cut him off, her voice trembling with a mix of fury and heartbreak. You let this happen. You let this happen. You let her talk to me like this, and you never say a word. You stand by while she tears me down, and I'm supposed to take it. Is this what you think love looks like? The room fell silent, except for the faint crackle of the fire in the kitchen. Maisha's lips curled into a thin smile, her eyes gleaming with malice. Love, my dear love, is earned. Respect is earned, and you've done nothing to deserve either. Amara's breath hitched, but she refused to back down. Respect goes both ways, Maisha. And if you think you can bully me into submission, you're wrong. Maisha stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. The air between them crackled with tension, thick and suffocating. You ungrateful girl, she spat. I tolerate you for Daniel's sake, but you don't belong in this family. You've never belonged in this family. You've never belonged. Daniel's weak attempt to intervene came too late. Mama, please, let's not. Don't, please. Me, Daniel. Maisha snapped, her voice cutting through his like a whip. You're as spineless as your father was, always pandering to weak women. Amara's eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Get out, she said quietly, her voice trembling with restrained fury. Maisha's head whipped around, her expression incredulous. What did you say? I said, get out of my house, Amara repeated, louder this time. You've crossed every line, and I won't allow it any more. The defiance in Amara's voice seemed to ignite something in Maisha. Her face contorted with rage, and in one swift motion, she stormed into the kitchen. Amara followed, her heart pounding in her chest. What are you doing? Amara demanded, her voice sharp. Maisha ignored her, grabbing the pot of stew from the fire. Her hands, calloused from years of labor, gripped the handles with a strength that belied her age. Amara's eyes widened in disbelief, as Mara's eyes widened in disbelief, as Maisha turned, her movements quick and deliberate. You want me gone? Maisha hissed, her voice low and venomous. Let me leave you with something to remember me by. Before Amara could react, Maisha flung the steaming contents of the pot toward her. The scalding liquid hit Amara's face and arms, the searing pain exploding across her skin like fire. She screamed, the sound raw and guttural, her body recoiling instinctively. The world seemed to blur in that moment, the pain blinding and all-consuming. She stumbled backward, knocking over a stool and sending dishes crashing to the floor. The acrid smell of burnt spices and skin filled the air, mingling with the sound of Maisha's heavy breathing and Daniel's panicked shouts. Amara! Daniel cried. Rushing to her side. Don't touch me, she gasped, her voice barely audible over her ragged breathing. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with the stew and stinging her burns. Daniel turned to Maisha, his face pale with shock. Mama, what have you done? Maisha stood frozen, the empty pot still clutched in her hands. Her chest heaved as she stared at Amara, the fire in her eyes replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. She deserved it, Maisha said coldly, her voice steady. Maybe now she'll learn her place. Daniel's face contorted with a mixture of anger and despair. You've gone too far, Mama. This, this is unforgivable. Amara struggled to her feet, her vision swimming. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony coursing through her body, but she forced herself to stand. You're both complicit, she said through gritted teeth, her voice trembling with rage. Her for what she's done, and you for standing by and letting it happen. She staggered toward the door, each step a battle against the overwhelming pain. I'm going to the clinic, she announced, her tone cold and resolute. Don't follow me, either of you. Amara, please, Daniel begged, his voice breaking. Let me help you. Help? She spat, turning to face him. You've done nothing but enable her. There's nothing you can do to fix this. Without another word, she pushed open the door and stepped into the cool evening air. The village was quiet, the distant hum of cicadas the only sound. Amara's vision blurred as she walked, her legs trembling beneath her. She clutched her burned arm to her chest, her breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. Villagers emerged from their homes, their faces etched with concern, as they took in her disheveled appearance and the angry red burns marring her skin. Someone called out to her, but she barely registered the words. Her focus was on putting one foot in front of the other, on reaching the clinic before her strength gave out. As she crossed the threshold of the small medical center, Amara collapsed into the arms of a nurse. The world around her faded into darkness, but one thought burned brightly in her mind. She would never return to that house, to that life. This was the moment everything changed. Amara woke to the soft hum of voices and the faint smell of antiseptic. The ceiling above her was white and bare, the walls of the clinic dimly lit by the morning sun filtering through a narrow window. Her body ached in ways she had never known before, her skin pulling tight where the burns had been treated. A nurse stood beside her bed, adjusting the IV line attached to her arm. You're awake, the nurse said gently, her voice steady and kind. You're safe now. Try to relax. Amara blinked, her memories rushing back in a torrent of heat, pain, and rage. Her hand instinctively reached for her face, but the nurse caught it before she could touch the bandages. Don't, the nurse said firmly. Your burns are still fresh. They'll heal, but it will take time. The words felt hollow. How could time heal this? Amara closed her eyes, trying to block out the sharp sting of her physical wounds and the deeper ache in her chest. She had walked away from everything, her home, her marriage, and the life she had fought so hard to build. But as much as it hurt, she knew she had made the right choice. The following days passed in a haze of treatment and restless reflection. The nurses tended to her burns with a quiet efficiency, their kindness a stark contrast to the chaos she had left behind. They cleaned her wounds, applied fresh dressings, and offered words of encouragement that Amara struggled to absorb. You're strong, one nurse, a woman named Naya told her as she smoothed ointment over Amara's arm. Stronger than you realize. This is the beginning of something new. Amara wanted to believe her, but the scars forming on her skin felt like a permanent reminder of her failure to stand up for herself sooner. She spent hours staring out the window at the savanna, watching the wind ripple through the tall grass. The vastness of it, the endless horizon, reminded her of how small she felt. And yet, the thought of its openness stirred something inside her, a faint glimmer of possibility. One afternoon, the door to her room opened, and Naya entered with a visitor. Miriam, a local women's advocate who had heard about Amara's situation. Miriam was tall and confident, her voice carrying a calm authority that immediately put Amara at ease. Amara, Miriam said, sitting down beside her bed, I've come to offer you support. You don't have to face this alone. Amara studied her, unsure of how to respond. Miriam seemed to sense her hesitation and continued, You're not the first woman in this village to endure what you've endured, and sadly, you won't be the last. But you can be one of the few who takes a stand. There are our resources available. Their help, shelter, and a community of women who understand what you're going through. Amara's throat tightened, the weight of Miriam's words sinking in. She had always believed her struggles were hers alone to bear, but the idea of a community, of others who might share her pain, was both comforting and terrifying. What if it's too late? Amara whispered, her voice barely audible. It's never too late, Miriam replied firmly. The fact that you're here, alive and determined, proves that. Miriam's visit marked the beginning of a shift in Amara's perspective. She began to talk more openly, sharing her story with Miriam and the nurses who cared for her. Each retelling was painful, but with every word, she felt a weight lifting. She was no longer carrying the burden alone. Weeks passed, and Amara's burns began to heal. The blisters on her arms had turned to tender pink scars, and the bandages on her face were replaced with smaller dressings. The physical pain subsided, but the emotional scars remained raw. She spent her days walking the clinic grounds, the crisp savanna air filling her lungs and clearing her mind. During one of these walks, Miriam approached her with a notebook in hand. You've been through something unimaginable, Miriam said. But I can see the strength in you, Amara. You have a story worth sharing. Have you thought about what you want to do next? Amara hesitated. The future felt like a vast, uncharted expanse, as intimidating as it was freeing. I don't know, she admitted. I feel lost. Everything I built, it's gone. Not gone, Miriam corrected. It's changing, and you have the power to shape what comes next. Use what you've been through to help others. Turn your pain into something meaningful. The idea lingered in Amara's mind long after Miriam left. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the women she had seen at the clinic. Women with similar scars, both visible and hidden. She thought about the nights she had spent crying in silence, the mornings she had endured Maisha's cutting remarks, and the years she had waited for Daniel to stand by her. She realized she wasn't just angry, she was determined. By the time she was discharged from the clinic, Amara had a plan. With Miriam's help, she moved into a women's cooperative on the outskirts of the village. The cooperative provided shelter, counseling, and vocational training for women recovering from domestic abuse. It was a safe haven, and for the first time in years, Amara felt a sense of belonging. She threw herself into the work, learning new skills and helping others whenever she could. She discovered a talent for beadwork, her nimble fingers creating intricate designs that quickly became popular at the local market. Each piece she crafted felt like a small act of defiance, a declaration that she was more than the pain she had endured. Amara also began speaking at community gatherings, sharing her story with other women. Her voice, once hesitant and uncertain, grew stronger with each retelling. Crew spoke about resilience, about finding strength in the face of adversity, and about the importance of standing up for oneself. Word of Amara's transformation spread throughout the village and beyond. Women who had once felt powerless began to approach her, seeking advice and encouragement. Amara listened to their stories, offering what guidance she could. She saw herself in their struggles, and each connection reaffirmed her resolve to create something lasting. One day, as she sat under the shade of a large acacia tree, crafting a new bracelet, Miriam approached her with a smile. "You've come a long way, Amara," she said. "Have you thought about taking this further? Starting something of your own?" Amara looked up, the idea sparking something inside her. She nodded slowly. "I want to help more women. I want to create a space where they can heal and rebuild, just like I've been able to." Miriam's smile widened. "Then let's make it happen." With Miriam's support, Amara began laying the groundwork for her own initiative, a resource center dedicated to empowering women. She worked tirelessly, using her beadwork earnings and donations from the community to fund the project. It was exhausting, but every step forward felt like a victory. As the weeks turned into months, the center took shape. Amara named it Apinde, meaning rainbow in Swahili, a symbol of hope after the storm. The opening day was a celebration of resilience and community, with women from all walks of life gathering to share their stories and support one another. Standing before the crowd, Amara felt a surge of pride. She had risen from the ashes of her pain, stronger and more determined than ever. The scars on her skin were no longer symbols of defeat. They were badges of survival, proof of her journey. For the first time in a long time, Amara felt whole. Her story wasn't over, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never let anyone silence her again. The road ahead was hers to walk, and she would do so with her head held high. The midday sun hung high in the sky, casting harsh light over the village square. Amara stood at the edge of the gathering, her heart pounding as she watched Daniel approach with hesitant steps. His presence stirred a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a lingering ache of something that once was love. She had not seen him since the night she fled. The night she fled. The night Maisha's rage boiled over into violence. Now, as he came closer, she prepared herself for whatever would come. Daniel stopped a few feet away, his shoulders hunched and his eyes downcast. He looked thinner, the lines on his face deeper, as though the weight of the past months had carved into him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence filled only by the faint chatter of the villagers, who milled about, glancing curiously in their direction. "Amara," he began, his voice hoarse. I, I needed to see you." Amara crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "Why now, Daniel? What could you possibly have to say to me after everything?" He flinched at the sharpness in her tone, but pressed on. "I know I failed you. I've had a lot of time to think, and I realize now how much I let you down. I wasn't the husband you deserved, and for that, I'm sorry." "Sorry?" Amora's voice cracked as anger bubbled to the surface. "You stood there, Daniel. You stood there while your mother poured hot oil on me. You didn't stop her. You didn't defend me. And now, months later, you show up with an apology and expect me to what? Forgive you? Forget it all happened." I didn't know what to do, Daniel admitted, his voice trembling. I froze. I was wrong, Amara. I was weak and I hate myself for it. I know it doesn't change what happened, but I want you to know that I regret everything. I want you to know that I regret everything. If I could take it all back, I would. Amara stared at him, her chest tight. She wanted to believe his words, to find solace in his regret, but the wounds he had left were too deep. Regret doesn't erase the scars on my skin, she said quietly. It doesn't undo the nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering why the man I loved chose silence over standing by me. Daniel looked at her then, truly looked at her, his eyes filled with guilt and pain. I loved you, Amara, he said softly. I still do. But I let my fear control me. Fear of my mother, fear of confrontation, fear of losing you. And in the end, I lost you anyway. Amara's throat tightened. There had been a time when hearing those words might have softened her resolve, but that time had passed. She had spent months rebuilding herself, learning to stand tall without leaning on anyone else. She was no longer the woman who had begged for scraps of affection and validation. She was stronger now, and she owed it to herself to protect that strength. I don't doubt that you loved me, Daniel, she said finally. But love isn't enough. Love without action, without support, is empty. I needed a partner, not a spectator. And you chose to stand by and watch as your mother tore me apart. His head dropped, his hands hanging limply at his sides. I understand, he murmured. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve forgiveness. I wanted to tell you that I'm sorry, that I know I was wrong. Amara took a deep breath, steadying herself. I do forgive you, she said, her voice steady. Not for your sake, but for mine. I've carried enough anger and pain. Forgiving you doesn't mean I'll forget, and it doesn't mean I'll come back. It means I'm freeing myself from the weight of your choices. Daniel's eyes glistened, and he nodded slowly. I don't expect anything more. Thank you for giving me that much. Before he could say more, a voice cut through the air like a blade. So, this is where you've been hiding. Amara turned to see Maisha striding into the square, her presence as commanding as ever. She wore a bright kanga and a scowl that deepened with every step closer. Villagers turned to watch, their murmurs filling the space as they recognized the infamous matriarch. What do you think you're doing, Daniel? Maisha snapped, her eyes narrowing as she glared at him. Groveling to this ungrateful woman. Have you no pride? Amara's anger flared, but she held her ground. This isn't your business, Maisha. It is my business, Maisha spat, her voice rising. You tore this family apart with your arrogance and disrespect, and now you stand here playing the victim. Don't think for a second that anyone is fooled by your act. Amara took a step closer, her voice calm but firm. You're wrong, Maisha. I didn't tear this family apart. You did. Your cruelty, your need to control, your refusal to respect anyone else's boundaries. That's what destroyed everything. How dare you? Maisha began, but Amara didn't let her finish. I dare because I've had enough, Amara said, her voice rising. For years I let you belittle me, humiliate me and manipulate me. I stayed silent, thinking it was my duty to endure. But no more. I won't let you or anyone treat me that way again. The square fell silent, the villagers watching with wide eyes as Amara stood tall, her words ringing with conviction. Maisha's face twisted in fury, but for once she seemed at a loss for words. Daniel stepped forward, his voice quiet but firm. Mama, stop. She's right. I should have stood up to you long ago. We both should have. Maisha's gaze snapped to him, her expression a mix of shock and betrayal. You would take her side after everything I've done for you? Yes, Mama, he said, his voice trembling but resolute. Because you were wrong. Amara felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name. Sadness, perhaps, or relief that Daniel had finally found his voice. But it didn't change her decision. She turned to him, her expression softening. You don't owe me this, she said. It's too late for us, Daniel. But maybe it's not too late for you to find yourself. He nodded, tears slipping down his face. I'm sorry, Amara. With that, she turned away, her steps steady as she walked toward the edge of the square. The villagers parted to let her pass, their whispers following her like a wave. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. Her decision was made, and for the first time in years, she felt free. As she reached the path leading back to the cooperative, the savanna stretched out before her, vast and open. The wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers, and the sun warmed her face. She had left behind the chains of her past, and though the road ahead was uncertain, it was hers to walk. Amara lifted her chin, a faint smile tugging at her lips. She wasn't running anymore. She was moving forward, step by step, into a future she had reclaimed for herself. Amara sat under the sprawling branches of an acacia tree, the savanna stretching endlessly before her. The cooperative was alive with activity, women working in the gardens, weaving baskets, and chatting as children played nearby. The rhythm of life here was simple yet powerful, a far cry from the suffocating weight of her old home. For the first time in years, Amara felt like she belonged to something meaningful. Her days were filled with purpose. She worked tirelessly at the cooperative, mentoring women who had endured similar struggles. Many of them arrived battered in body and spirit, their eyes shadowed with pain. Amara knew that look all too well, but she also knew the strength that lay dormant beneath it. She shared her story not as a tale of defeat, but as a tale of defeat, but as a testament to resilience, offering hope to those who thought they had none. The beadwork she had once practiced as a small escape from her troubles had become her livelihood. Her intricate designs, bracelets, necklaces, and earrings were not only beautiful but carried stories of survival. Each piece was unique, woven with bright colors that symbolized renewal and hope. Her creations quickly gained attention, not just in the village, but in neighboring towns. Orders began pouring in, and Amara realized her small venture could become something much larger. One morning, as the sun rose over the savanna, Miriam approached her with a wide smile. In her hands was a letter. Amara, you've done it, she said, handing it over. Amara opened the envelope, her hands trembling. It was from a women's empowerment organization based in Nairobi. They had heard about her work and were offering her a grant to expand her initiative. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for, a chance to reach even more women and create lasting change. We'll build a workshop, Amara said, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. A place where women can learn skills, earn an income, and rebuild their lives. With the grant money, Amara and the women of the cooperative began construction on the workshop. The entire community came together, the air buzzing with excitement and anticipation. Men volunteered their labor, children carried water, and women worked side by side, laying bricks and painting walls. It wasn't just a building. It wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of unity and strength, a beacon for anyone who needed a fresh start. Amara threw herself into the project, overseeing every detail. She wanted the workshop to be more than just a space for work. She wanted it to be a sanctuary. She envisioned a bright, open space filled with natural light where women could feel safe and inspired. When the workshop was finally complete, it was more beautiful than she had imagined. The walls were painted in vibrant colors, and a mural depicting a rising sun adorned the front, symbolizing new beginnings. The grand opening of the workshop was a celebration unlike any the village had seen. People came from miles around, drawn by curiosity and admiration for what Amara had achieved. The sound of drums and singing filled the air as the women of the cooperative danced in a circle, their joy contagious. Amara stood at the center of it all, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped forward, her voice carrying over the crowd. "This workshop is not just a building," she said. "It's a promise that no matter what you've been through, you can rise again. Together, we are stronger. Together, we are stronger. Together, we can build a future full." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing across the savannah. Amara felt a surge of emotion, a mix of relief and determination. She had come so far, but her journey was far from over. The workshop was just the beginning. In the months that followed, the workshop became a lifeline for many. Women learned new skills, from tailoring to basket weaving, and were able to sell their creations at markets in nearby towns. The income gave them independence and dignity, allowing them to break free from cycles of abuse and poverty. Amara's beadwork business flourished as well, with her designs being sold in shops as far away as Nairobi. Despite her success, Amara remained deeply involved in the cooperative. She spent her days teaching, listening, and encouraging. Each woman she helped was a reminder of why she had started this journey. They came to her broken, but she watched them transform, their spirits rekindling as they discovered their own strength. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara sat with Miriam outside the workshop. The two women watched as the last of the workers packed up for the day, their laughter carried on the evening breeze. "You've built something incredible here," Miriam said, her voice warm with admiration. "Do you ever think about how far you've come?" Amara smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago," she admitted. "But the scars remind me. They're part of who I am now. A map of where I am now. A map of where I've been. And they've brought me here." Miriam nodded thoughtfully. "What about the future? What's next for Amara?" Amara didn't answer right away. She let the question settle, her mind drifting to the endless possibilities. She had rebuilt her life piece by piece, but there was so much more she wanted to do. She thought about expanding the workshop, reaching more women, and perhaps one day taking her message beyond the village. The world was vast, and for the first time, she felt ready to embrace it. "I want to keep going," she said finally. I want to help as many women as I can. If my story can inspire even one person to stand up and reclaim their life, then it's all been worth it. Miriam reached over and placed a hand on Amara's. It already has, Amara. You're changing lives every day. The two women sat in comfortable silence, the stars beginning to twinkle above them. The journey had been long and painful, but it had also been transformative. Amara had faced her darkest moments and emerged stronger, her scars no longer a mark of defeat, but a testament to her resilience. As the night deepened, Amara returned to her small house near the cooperative. She stood in front of the mirror, her reflection illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern. The faint scars on her arms and face were visible, but they no longer filled her with sadness. Instead, she saw a woman who had overcome the impossible, a woman who had turned her pain into purpose. Amara's lips curved into a smile. Her story was far from over, but she had reclaimed its narrative. Each day was a new chapter, and she was determined to write it on her own terms. The workshop, the women she helped, and the community she had built were proof that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way forward. Tomorrow, she would wake to another sunrise, another opportunity to build, to heal, and to inspire, and she would face it with the unwavering strength she had discovered within herself. The sun rose over the savanna, casting its golden light across the rolling grasslands and painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Amara stood outside the workshop, the crisp morning air filling her lungs. She watched as the women of the cooperative began their day, their laughter and chatter weaving a tapestry of life and hope. It was a scene she never tired of, a daily reminder of how far they had all come. Today was special. The small village that had once seemed so isolated was now a hub of inspiration. The Women's Workshop Apinde was hosting a regional gathering for advocates, artisans, and survivors of domestic violence. Artisans and survivors of domestic violence. Attendees had traveled from nearby towns and even distant cities, drawn by the impact of the work being done here. For Amara, this was more than an event. It was a culmination of her journey, and a declaration of her journey, and a declaration of what was possible. As the morning progressed, visitors arrived in colorful waves, their vehicles kicking up small clouds of dust as they parked near the edge of the village. Miriam, as always, was by Amara's side, helping to coordinate the influx of guests. She handed out schedules, answered questions, and offered words of encouragement to the women who were nervous about sharing their stories. Are you ready? Miriam asked, turning to Amara with a warm smile. Amara took a deep breath, her hand brushing the bracelet she always wore, a piece of her own design, vibrant with colors that symbolized renewal. I'm ready, she said, her voice steady. She wasn't just speaking to Miriam. She was reminding herself of everything she had overcome to stand here today. The event began with music, the rhythmic drumming filling the air and drawing everyone to the open courtyard in front of the workshop. Amara stood at the edge of the gathering, taking in the sight of so many women, mothers, daughters, sisters, dancing together. Their movements were a celebration of resilience, a physical declaration that they were no longer defined by their pasts. When it was time for the speeches, the crowd quieted, their attention shifting to a small platform adorned with flowers and colorful fabrics. Miriam stepped forward first, her voice carrying easily over the murmurs of the audience. We are here today to celebrate strength, courage, and the power of community, Miriam began, her tone both commanding and kind. Each of you has a story worth telling, and together we are creating a future that is brighter and more inclusive than ever before. Her words were met with applause, and when she called Amara to the stage, the clapping grew louder, accompanied by cheers of encouragement. Amara's heart raced as she stepped forward, but she reminded herself why she was here, to share her truth and inspire others. She stood before the crowd, her hands steady on the microphone. For a moment, she let the silence settle, her eyes scanning the faces before her. Some were familiar, others were strangers, but all of them carried the same look of quiet anticipation. My name is Amara, she began, her voice clear, and like many of you, I have walked through fire to stand where I am today. She paused, letting her words sink in. Not long ago, I thought my story was one of defeat. I thought my scars, both the ones on my skin and the ones in my heart, were marks of failure. But I was wrong. These scars are not symbols of weakness. They are proof of survival, proof that I chose to rise instead of fall. The audience was silent, hanging on her every word. Amara continued, her confidence growing with each sentence. When I left the life that hurt me, I had nothing but my own determination. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back. That decision led me here, to this community, to this workshop, and to all of you. Together, we have built something extraordinary. Women can heal, grow, and thrive. A wave of applause swept through the crowd, but Amara wasn't finished. She took a deep breath, her next words carrying even greater weight. This workshop isn't just about beadwork or tailoring or weaving. It's about reclaiming our power. It's about proving that we are more than the pain we've endured. And it's about showing the world that no one has the right to take our voices, our choices, or our dignity. The applause that followed was thunderous, some women rising to their feet as they cheered. Amara stepped back from the microphone, her chest swelling with pride and gratitude. She had never imagined she would stand in a place like this, speaking words that carried so much meaning, but now she couldn't imagine being anywhere else. As the day unfolded, the energy of the gathering only grew. Women shared their stories in small groups, their voices weaving a tapestry of resilience and hope. Artisans displayed their work. Artisans displayed their work, each piece a testament to the creativity and strength that had been rediscovered in this space. Amara moved among them, listening, encouraging, and marveling at the connections forming around her. In the afternoon, a small group of journalists arrived, their cameras capturing the vibrant energy of the event. One of them approached Amara, a young woman with a notepad in hand and curiosity in her eyes. Amara, the journalist began, her tone respectful. Your story is inspiring so many people. What would you say to someone who feels trapped, who doesn't believe they can find a way out? Amara considered the question carefully before answering. I would tell them that they are stronger than they know, she said. The hardest step is the first one, choosing to leave, to fight, to hope. But once you take that step, you realize you're not alone. There's a world of people who will stand with you, who will help you rebuild. And no matter how dark it seems, there is always a way forward. The journalist nodded, scribbling furiously as Amara spoke. When the interview ended, Amara watched as the woman joined the crowd, her enthusiasm adding to the day's energy. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting the village in warm hues of gold and amber, Amara found a quiet moment to herself. She stood at the edge of the workshop, looking out at the bustling scene before her. The women she had helped, the community they had built, it was all real, all thriving. Her hand brushed the scars on her arm, the ones that had once been a source of shame. Now they were part of her story, part of the journey that had brought her here. She smiled, a deep, genuine smile that came from a place of peace and pride. Miriam joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "This is just the beginning, she said softly. "There's so much more we can do." "I know," Amara replied, her voice steady, "and I'm ready." As the first stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Amara felt a quiet certainty settle over her. She had faced the fire and come out stronger. She had rebuilt her life, not as a victim, but as a survivor, a leader, and a beacon of hope. Whatever lay ahead, she would face it with courage, knowing that her scars were no longer a burden. They were her armor. The future stretched before her, vast and full of possibilities. And for the first time, Amara wasn't afraid. She was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. Thank you for staying with us to hear Amara's powerful journey of resilience and transformation. Her story reminds us that no matter how dark the moment, we have the strength to rise and reclaim our lives. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. By subscribing, you'll never miss another story of courage, hope, and empowerment. Join us as we continue to share voices that need to be heard. See you in the next video.